Ed Sullivan revealed 7 music legends who hid truly evil sides. Every Sunday night, millions of American families trusted one man to decide who entered their living rooms. Ed Sullivan didn't just book talent, he judged character. While audiences saw legends being born on stage, Sullivan watched what happened when the cameras stopped rolling. What he saw disturbed him. These weren't just difficult artists or rebellious stars. These were performers Sullivan believed carried something darker, something dangerous. Privately, he warned his staff. Quietly, he banned some of the biggest names in music history. 7 legends, untold stories, and a question that still haunts us today. How much evil can we forgive when the music is great? Jerry Lee Lewis didn't rise into America's living rooms politely. He crashed through them, boots first, slamming piano keys like he was fighting the instrument itself, daring it to break before he did. In the late 1950s, when television still wore a suit and tie, Lewis arrived like a house fire, grinning as if he'd already won. Teenagers felt liberated. Parents felt uneasy. And Ed Sullivan, standing just off stage, felt something colder than fear: instinct. Sullivan had launched stars before, but Lewis didn't feel like a star. He felt like a man who believed rules were suggestions meant for other people. Still, Sullivan gave him the stage because America wanted danger dressed as entertainment, and Jerry Lee Lewis delivered chaos with perfect timing. They called him the Killer, as a joke, as branding, as rebellion, but Lewis wore the name too comfortably. Then the question came, almost casually, during a tour overseas: how old is your wife? 13. Not denied. Not softened. 13, and his cousin. The answer ripped the mask off overnight. Radio stations fell silent. Concerts vanished. And Ed Sullivan didn't hesitate. He didn't negotiate or wait for public opinion to settle. He felt betrayed, not professionally, but morally. Sullivan believed that when he introduced someone to American families, he was vouching for more than talent. He was lending trust. And Jerry Lee Lewis had shattered it. Lewis was never invited back. No redemption tour. No second chance. Just silence. Many thought the scandal alone destroyed him, but Sullivan believed something deeper had been exposed. This wasn't a mistake. It was a window into a man without restraint. Time would only confirm that suspicion. Lewis survived, drifting into country music where audiences asked fewer questions, but destruction followed him faithfully. 7 marriages. Stories of violence whispered behind closed doors. Fear where love should have lived. Then the deaths. One wife drowned in a swimming pool before divorce papers were signed. Another dead from a methadone overdose barely weeks after saying, "I do." No convictions. No final answers. Just a trail of tragedy that made the nickname, the Killer, feel less ironic and more prophetic. Jerry Lee Lewis remained a towering influence, a pioneer whose sound shaped generations, and that is what makes his story so unsettling, because brilliance didn't soften the damage, and genius didn't restrain the harm. Ed Sullivan never stood on stage to condemn him. He didn't need to. In an era before viral scandals and instant accountability, silence was the harshest verdict a gatekeeper could deliver. Sullivan understood that fame magnifies character, and that some people, no matter how gifted, should not be amplified when their darkness threatens to spill outward. Jerry Lee Lewis burned bright, burned fast, and burned himself in the process, leaving behind a legacy that forces an uncomfortable truth. Talent can open doors, but character decides whether what follows is creation or destruction. James Brown didn't walk onto the stage to perform. He marched onto it to dominate, moving with military precision, commanding every beat, every horn stab, every scream from the crowd as if the music itself answered only to him. To audiences, he was pure electricity, a man who turned sweat into spectacle and discipline into rhythm, a relentless force crowned the godfather of soul. Ed Sullivan admired that power, even celebrated it on air, but backstage he saw something else entirely. Brown didn't merely lead his band, he ruled it, enforcing obedience with fines, humiliation, and fear, docking pay for scuffed shoes or a misstep, reminding every musician who held absolute control. Sullivan came from an older world, where stars were expected to be grateful, professional, human. Brown was none of those things. He demanded loyalty, reverence, submission, and he carried himself like a man who believed the stage had crowned him king not just of music, but of people. Whispers followed him through the corridors of fame: arrests, weapons charges, explosive rages, violence toward the women closest to him, and Sullivan listened carefully. He heard stories of girlfriends terrified behind closed doors, of wives bruised and silenced, of a temper that flared without warning and left damage in its wake. Sullivan reportedly confided to his staff that Brown carried something dark inside him, something that went beyond ego or ambition, something volatile and dangerous. Yet unlike others, Brown was never banned outright. His talent was too immense, his cultural impact too powerful, his audience too devoted. And so Sullivan lived in contradiction, praising Brown's brilliance on camera while keeping his distance off it, offering applause but not trust. The years proved that unease was not misplaced. Brown's criminal record grew alongside his legacy. Domestic abuse allegations followed him relentlessly, including from his wife Adrienne, who filed assault charges, withdrew them, returned, and lived in a cycle of fear that ended tragically when she died after surgery in 1996. Brown remained a musical titan, his innovations echoing through funk, hip-hop, disco, and pop, sampled endlessly, revered endlessly, even as the stories behind the music grew darker and harder to dismiss. Ed Sullivan understood something uncomfortable long before the public did: that genius does not neutralize cruelty, that discipline can become tyranny when fueled by unchecked power. He saw a man whose music liberated millions while his private world imprisoned those closest to him. And in that tension lived a question Sullivan never answered aloud, but clearly wrestled with: how far can cultural brilliance carry someone before character drags it into shadow? James Brown died celebrated, canonized, immortalized, but his legacy remains split between innovation and intimidation, between inspiration and harm. And Sullivan's instinct lingers as a quiet warning. When control replaces conscience, when power goes unchallenged, even the most joyful music can be built on fear, and the cost is always paid by those who stand closest to the throne. Chuck Berry looked like the clean version of rebellion: a sharp suit, a wide smile, a guitar slung low as he duck-walked across the stage, turning teenage restlessness into 3 chords and a story that finally sounded like real life. To America, he wasn't dangerous. He was familiar, charming, the sound of jukeboxes and first freedom. He wrote the blueprint for rock and roll, taught the genre how to talk, how to move, how to dream. When Ed Sullivan first booked him, he believed he was welcoming a pioneer, a man whose music captured youth without crossing into chaos. On camera, Berry delivered exactly that: polished, charismatic, revolutionary. But backstage, another story followed him, one that grew heavier the more Sullivan listened. Berry's past wasn't rumor, it was documented. Before fame, he had been convicted of armed robbery, sent to a reformatory, released into a world he would soon reshape. Then, at the height of his success, the truth surfaced again, impossible to ignore. In 1959, Berry was arrested under the Mann Act for transporting a 14-year-old girl across state lines. The details were ugly, the implications worse, and the timing catastrophic. Sullivan was horrified. He believed in second chances, but there were lines he would not blur, and crimes involving minors crossed them completely. Berry went to prison while his records still spun on radios, while teenagers still memorized his lyrics, while the industry struggled to separate the music from the man who made it. When Berry returned, older, hardened, and more guarded, Sullivan's door remained closed. The trust was gone. And yet, the story didn't stop there. Years later, lawsuits emerged accusing Berry of secretly videotaping women in the bathrooms of a restaurant he owned, allegations that ended in a multi-million-dollar settlement and reinforced the sense that something deeply wrong had followed him for decades. Sullivan saw Berry's case as a warning long before culture had language for it, proof that charm could conceal predatory behavior, that innovation could coexist with exploitation. Chuck Berry's influence remains undeniable. Without him, rock and roll doesn't sound the same, doesn't walk the same, doesn't speak the same. But his legacy is inseparable from discomfort, from the realization that the foundation of an art form can be built by someone capable of profound harm. Sullivan never publicly erased Barry's music from history, but he refused to elevate the man behind it, understanding that celebration is a form of endorsement. In Barry, he saw the earliest version of a dilemma that still haunts culture today. When the architect of something beautiful leaves damage in his wake, do we honor the creation, or do we finally listen to the silence around it? Chuck Berry changed music forever, but Ed Sullivan believed character mattered just as much as chords, and once that line was crossed, no amount of genius could carry him back across the stage. Elvis Presley didn't just arrive in America. He swept through it like a tremor, shaking living rooms, church pews, and the fragile confidence of a generation that believed it still controlled youth. When he first appeared on television, parents saw hips they couldn't stop, girls they couldn't calm, and a power they didn't understand. Ed Sullivan resisted him at first, not because of the music, but because of the reaction. The near-religious devotion Elvis inspired in teenage girls who screamed, cried, and fainted as if pulled by something deeper than entertainment. When Sullivan finally booked him, the compromise became legendary: film him from the waist up. History would remember it as censorship, but Sullivan's concern went far beyond choreography. From the wings, he watched the crowd, not the performer, and what unsettled him wasn't rebellion, it was worship. Elvis wasn't just admired, he was obeyed, idolized, surrendered to, and Sullivan sensed a dangerous imbalance forming between a grown man and an audience too young to understand the power being exercised over them. Unlike others on this list, Elvis left no criminal record, no police files thick with charges, no courtroom verdicts to point to, only patterns. Patterns that would later become harder to ignore. Elvis met Priscilla when she was 14, molded her life, her appearance, her movement, shaping her into a private ideal long before she was old enough to consent to the weight of that role. Biographers would later document his preference for very young, virginal women, relationships defined by control more than partnership, intimacy shadowed by dominance. Sullivan never knew all the details, but he sensed something was off, something unhealthy in the way fame collapsed boundaries and turned adoration into access. Over time, Presley's image softened, carefully managed by Colonel Tom Parker, transformed into something safer, more respectable, and Sullivan publicly endorsed him, telling audiences that Elvis was a decent, fine boy. But behind the scenes, the unease never fully disappeared. Sullivan admired the talent, the voice, the cultural earthquake Elvis had created, yet remained wary of what unchecked influence could do when paired with isolation and entitlement. Elvis became a symbol larger than the man himself, trapped by expectation, insulated by wealth, slowly unraveling under the pressure of his own mythology. Drugs replaced rebellion. Excess replaced freedom. And the young girls who once screamed from the front rows became footnotes in a larger story about power and loneliness. Sullivan's judgment of Elvis remains one of his most controversial, not because it was cruel, but because it was complicated. He didn't see a villain. He saw a warning, a reminder that fame can distort intimacy, that adoration can become exploitation without intention or malice, and that cultural power carries risks no stage can contain. Elvis Presley died crowned the king, beloved, mythologized, immortalized, yet his story lingers with an uncomfortable truth Ed Sullivan sensed early on: not all danger announces itself through crime. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in charm, applause, and the kind of love that asks nothing back until it's already taken too much. Phil Spector never needed to step onto the stage to control a room. His power lived behind glass, behind mixing boards, behind walls so thick they trapped sound and people alike. To the world, he was a prodigy, a boy genius who reshaped pop music by stacking emotion on top of emotion until it thundered out of radios as the wall of sound, lush, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. His songs felt euphoric, romantic, innocent even, which made Ed Sullivan's reaction to him all the more unsettling. Sullivan refused to feature Spector as a personality, even as acts produced by him appeared regularly on the show. It wasn't professional jealousy. It was instinct. Sullivan believed there was something deeply wrong with the man who created so much beauty yet radiated something cold and unstable behind the scenes. Stories reached him quietly at first, accounts of control, intimidation, and cruelty in the studio, particularly toward young female singers who found themselves isolated, monitored, and afraid. Spector didn't collaborate, he dominated. He didn't guide artists, he imprisoned them inside his vision. Nowhere was this clearer than in his marriage to Ronnie Spector, the voice of the Ronettes, whom he would later keep virtually confined in their mansion, threatening her life if she tried to leave, surrounding her with barbed wire, dogs, and paranoia disguised as protection. Sullivan despised Spector's arrogance, but more than that, he sensed danger. He reportedly warned his staff to keep Spector away, allowing the music but refusing to elevate the man behind it. As the years passed, the darkness Sullivan had detected only grew louder. Spector's behavior became erratic and terrifying, guns pulled in recording sessions, threats issued casually, power enforced through fear. Artists like John Lennon and Leonard Cohen would later recount moments of genuine terror in his presence, as genius curdled into menace. Then, in 2003, the story reached the ending Sullivan had seemingly anticipated decades earlier. Actress Lana Clarkson was found dead in Spector's mansion, shot through the mouth, a death Spector initially dismissed as an accident before a jury rejected that lie. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, where he would eventually die, sealed off from the world he once dominated. Looking back, Sullivan's refusal to platform Spector feels chillingly precise. He understood something most people don't want to accept, that creativity does not purify cruelty, that brilliance can coexist with profound violence, and that the most dangerous figures are often the ones who never raise their voices in public. Phil Spector created music that made people feel safe, loved, and uplifted, while privately cultivating fear, control, and obsession. And in that contradiction lives Sullivan's quiet warning. Sometimes the darkest souls don't perform under the spotlight. They build it, hide behind it, and wait for the world to mistake genius for innocence until it's too late. Ike Turner understood rhythm the way a builder understands structure, tightening every groove until the band snapped into place, turning raw talent into something explosive and undeniable. And when Ike and Tina Turner stepped onto the Ed Sullivan stage, the electricity was impossible to fake. Tina moved like fire, voice ripping through the air with power that demanded attention, while Ike stood just off to the side, watchful, rigid, controlling the music with clipped gestures and narrowed eyes. To audiences, it looked like discipline, leadership, professionalism. To Ed Sullivan, watching from close range, it looked like something else entirely. Ike didn't merely lead Tina, he monitored her. Every step, every breath, every moment was measured, as if the performance extended far beyond the stage lights. Sullivan wasn't easily fooled by choreography or charm. He noticed how Ike hovered, how praise flowed downward but never back, how fear sat quietly behind Tina's smile. Backstage, the atmosphere shifted. Crew members sensed it. Musicians whispered it. Sullivan felt it. Stories followed Ike through the industry long before they reached the public. Cocaine-fueled rages, brutal beatings, absolute control disguised as mentorship. Sullivan developed a habit that spoke louder than words. He praised Tina directly and kept Ike at a distance, a subtle but deliberate act in a world where ignoring the man in charge was almost unheard of. It was his quiet way of acknowledging what he believed was happening behind closed doors. Years later, Tina would confirm every instinct Sullivan had trusted. She described a life of terror, of being beaten, humiliated, forced to perform while injured, trapped by contracts, fear, and dependence, escaping only after years of planning and desperation. Ike's musical legacy was real. His early recordings helped lay the groundwork for rock and roll itself, but it was inseparable from the harm he inflicted on the people closest to him. Sullivan continued booking the act not because he excused Ike, but because Tina's brilliance deserved to be seen, even as he privately judged the man who controlled her as something far darker than a difficult personality. Ike Turner died disgraced, his influence overshadowed by the abuse he could no longer deny, while Tina survived, reclaimed her voice, and rewrote her story on her own terms. Looking back, Sullivan's discomfort feels painfully clear. He understood that genius paired with cruelty becomes tyranny, that control masquerading as leadership is still violence, and that silence often surrounds abuse until someone chooses to see it for what it is. In Ike Turner, Sullivan saw a man who built music with precision and destroyed lives with the same cold discipline, leaving behind a lesson that still echoes louder than any hit record. Talent may command applause, but character determines whether that applause is earned or paid for in suffering. Jim Morrison didn't come to television to behave. He came to test limits, to stare authority in the face and see if it blinked first. By 1967, the Doors were no longer just a band, they were a signal flare for a generation drifting towards psychedelia, rebellion, and excess, and Morrison stood at the center like a poet who believed chaos was truth. When they were booked on the Ed Sullivan Show, it was supposed to be a coronation, the moment underground credibility met mainstream exposure. But Ed Sullivan sensed danger immediately. Morrison wasn't nervous. He wasn't grateful. He was amused, like a man already planning to break something. Sullivan had one condition: change a single lyric in Light My Fire. Girl, we couldn't get much higher, a line he feared would slip drugs into America's living rooms. Morrison agreed backstage, shook hands, gave his word. Then the cameras rolled. Morrison looked straight into the lens and sang the original lyric anyway, slow, deliberate, unmistakable. It wasn't an accident. It was a challenge. Sullivan watched the betrayal unfold in real time, felt the authority of his stage collapse under one man's smirk. When the performance ended, he refused to shake their hands, an almost unthinkable breach of his own ritual, and told the band they would never return. And they didn't. For Sullivan, it wasn't about censorship or rock rebellion, it was about character. Morrison had given his word and broken it publicly, intentionally, for the thrill of defiance. To Sullivan, that wasn't art, it was a warning sign. Morrison wore rebellion like armor, but behind it lived something unraveling. Alcohol blurred his edges. Performances grew erratic. Press followed. The infamous Miami incident would later cement his reputation as uncontrollable, even as fans defended him as misunderstood. Sullivan believed Morrison wasn't merely provocative, he was self-destructive, driven by impulses he could no longer steer. Unlike others Sullivan distanced himself from quietly, Morrison forced the break in front of millions, exposing a deeper truth. Some artists don't just reject boundaries, they need to destroy them to feel alive. Morrison's descent accelerated. Substance abuse hollowed out the poet. The voice remained, but the control faded. By 27, he was dead in Paris, immortalized as a tragic icon, frozen forever at the edge of his own mythology. Looking back, Sullivan's judgment feels less conservative than prophetic. He saw that Morrison's rebellion wasn't aimed at systems. It was aimed inward, and it would eventually consume him. Jim Morrison left behind extraordinary music and a haunting legacy, but also a reminder Ed Sullivan understood instinctively. When defiance becomes an identity and ego replaces responsibility, even genius can't save someone from the damage they're determined to cause. Morrison didn't just burn bridges, he burned himself, and the world watched the fire long after the stage went dark. Ed Sullivan never called himself a moral judge, yet history quietly turned him into one. For nearly 2 decades, he stood at the narrow gate between obscurity and immortality, deciding who America welcomed into its living rooms every Sunday night. In an era without algorithms, without social media outrage, without instant accountability, Sullivan's instincts carried enormous consequence. He understood something that still unsettles us today, that visibility is power, and power amplifies whatever already lives inside a person. Sullivan didn't believe talent erased character. He believed it exposed it. The performers he questioned, distanced himself from, or quietly removed were not always the least gifted. Often they were the most brilliant, but brilliance never blinded him to patterns of cruelty, control, or self-destruction. He made mistakes, held outdated views, and lived within the limits of his time, yet he took his responsibility seriously, believing that fame should not come without consequence, especially when young audiences were watching. Today, in a world where platforms reward controversy and algorithms elevate attention over accountability, Sullivan's approach feels almost unimaginable. One man, one stage, one decision made not just on ratings, but on conscience. The stories of these artists force us into an uncomfortable reckoning. Their music changed culture, shaped generations, and still moves us. but their private actions leave scars that never fade. Sullivan never claimed to solve that contradiction. He lived inside it. Sometimes he compromised. Sometimes he drew a hard line. Sometimes he was right earlier than anyone wanted to admit. His legacy isn't about censorship or control, it's about the cost of amplification. It asks a question we're still avoiding. When we celebrate greatness, what are we willing to ignore, and who pays the price for our silence? Ed Sullivan's judgments weren't perfect, but they were intentional, grounded in the belief that character matters when the spotlight is powerful enough to shape culture itself. And that question hasn't disappeared with black and white television. It's grown louder, more urgent, and more personal than ever. If this story made you uncomfortable, that's the point. If it made you think, stay with us. Like, subscribe, and join us as we continue exploring the hidden truths behind entertainment history's most celebrated figures. Because the music may live forever, but the choices behind it still matter today.